Darren's boots crunched against the dry, cracked earth as he walked through the barren landscape. The wind howled, carrying dust in every direction. His face, weathered and tired, was covered by a thin layer of dirt. He hadn't seen a clean face in weeks, perhaps months. The last time he had been near civilization, it hadn't been a pleasant experience. Years ago, Darren had been a proud soldier of the Human Alliance, one of the best in his unit. He had trained for years, preparing for the moment when he would fight for his people and protect humanity from any threat. But that moment never came the way he had imagined. The war with the Galarian Empire had taken a disastrous turn. What was supposed to be a simple mission turned into a full-scale disaster, a miscalculation, a mistake from someone in command, and Darren had been blamed. It didn't matter that the intelligence had been wrong or that he had followed orders. All that mattered was that he had been the face of failure, the face of defeat. The war had ended, but Darren's punishment had just begun. He was branded a traitor, his name tarnished. No longer was he a hero, he was an outcast. His superiors had exiled him to the furthest corner of the galaxy, a desolate planet where no one would ever bother him again. That was where he had been sent, to this god-forsaken world of dust and rock. Darren had been given nothing but the basics, a small shelter, food rations, and a few tools to survive. But he had no desire to escape. He had no home left to return to. He wasn't even sure if he still had a place in the universe. The days blended together, each one feeling like the last, with nothing to look forward to except the quiet of his lonely existence. He had spent months perfecting his survival skills. The planet was harsh, its environment unforgiving, its creatures hostile. But Darren was resourceful. He learned how to hunt, how to scavenge for supplies, and how to keep himself alive with what little he had. The silence, the isolation, it suited him. It was what he deserved. The small shelter he had built out of scrap metal and old rocks was far from comfortable, but it was enough. He had no need for anything more. The stars above were his only companions, the wind his only sound. It was in this solitude that Darren began to forget who he had been. He had no title anymore, no rank, no identity. He was just a man, surviving on a forgotten world. As he worked on a small fire outside his shelter one evening, Darren couldn't help but think back to the past, the battles, the comrades who had fought beside him, the promises of victory. It all seemed so distant now, like a story told to him in a dream. He had been a soldier once, fighting for a cause. But now, he was just a ghost. The wind picked up, carrying with it the familiar scent of dust. Darren was used to the endless silence, but tonight something felt different. There was an odd, unfamiliar hum in the air, a sound that didn't belong on this planet. He stood up, listening carefully. At first he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But then the sound grew louder, closer. The ground trembled beneath his boots as something massive soared through the sky. Darren's heart raced. Was it an asteroid? A storm? Or something else? He didn't wait to find out. He dropped the fire and rushed to the edge of the cliff near his shelter, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The air grew thick, charged with energy. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A ship, falling from the sky in a fiery ball of light. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. The ship crashed on the planet with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave through the air. Darren's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what kind of ship it was, but it was clear it wasn't just any ordinary crash. Whoever or whatever had been on that ship needed help. Against his better judgment, Darren ran towards the crash site. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the instinct of a soldier, the part of him that still wanted to fight for something, anything. Or maybe it was simply curiosity. Whatever the reason, Darren couldn't ignore the burning urge to investigate. As he reached the crash site, he saw the wreckage scattered across the rocky landscape. Pieces of metal and alien technology were strewn in all directions. The air smelled of burning fuel and scorched earth. Amidst the destruction, he saw them, the survivors. 5 figures, each one barely standing, covered in soot and blood. Darren's heart raced. They weren't human. These beings were tall, with features unlike anything he had ever seen. Their skin shimmered in strange colors, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The tallest of them, a woman with dark violet skin, stumbled towards him, her face a mixture of pain and determination. "Help us," she gasped, her voice weak but full of authority. "We need shelter, food, protection." Darren stood frozen, his mind racing. He had never encountered beings like these before. Were they friends or enemies? Could he trust them? But as the woman's eyes locked onto his, he saw something that made him pause. It wasn't fear or hostility. It was desperation. And something else. Something familiar. The look of someone who had lost everything. Without thinking, Darren stepped forward, offering his hand. "I'll help you," he said, his voice hoarse from days of silence. "But you'll need to explain who you are." The woman nodded slowly, her lips curling into a small, thankful smile. "We are the last of our people," she said quietly. "We've been hunted to the brink of extinction by a warlord who seeks to erase us from the galaxy. We are survivors, widows of fallen warriors. We've come here in search of refuge, but we need your help to survive." Darren's eyes widened as he processed her words. 5 widows, survivors of a galactic war. What were the chances of this? Was this fate? Or simply another test? The woman, her name revealed to be Zara, gave him a hard look, as if studying him. "We know what you are, human. You're a soldier. You've been exiled, abandoned. But we have nothing left. And now we're counting on you." Darren felt a strange weight settle in his chest. He had spent so long in silence, hiding from the world, from his own pain. But now, in the presence of these strangers, he felt the spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help you, but we'll need to move fast. This planet isn't safe, and neither are you." Zara's eyes softened. "We know. We've seen the enemy's forces, but now we have you, and that's all we need." Darren glanced over at the other 4 widows, each one looking at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. But beneath their hardened exteriors, he could see it. Vulnerability. They were not just survivors of war. They were women, fighting to protect what little they had left. And so, without another word, Darren led them back to his shelter, the first sign of life he had encountered in months. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if they would succeed or fail. But for the first time in a long time, Darren felt something he hadn't in years. The weight of responsibility and the faint stirrings of hope. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren land. The sky turned a deep shade of purple, and the wind blew across the rocky terrain, carrying with it the faint scent of dust. The evening was calm, too calm for Darren's liking. As he stared into the distance, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of quiet footsteps behind him. Zara, the leader of the group, approached. Her tall, imposing figure moved with purpose, her violet skin glowing faintly under the fading light. The other 4 women followed her, Lyra, the healer, whose green eyes shimmered with an unsettling intensity. Mara, the scout, whose body was small but quick like a shadow on the wind. Rona, the strategist, whose mind was sharp and calculating. And Kara, the engineer, whose hands were always moving, working, building. They had all gathered in the small shelter Darren had built, the only place on the planet where they could find temporary safety. The crash had left them battered, but alive. They had been through so much, and Darren could see the weight of their past on their faces. Each one carried the loss of loved ones, the destruction of their homes, the pain of being hunted like animals by a ruthless enemy. "Darren," Zara's voice broke through his thoughts. "We need to talk." He turned to face her. She was standing, tall as always, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, they seemed to understand each other without words. They were both survivors, each trying to find their way in a galaxy that had turned its back on them. "What do you need?" Darren asked, his voice steady, but laced with curiosity. "We need your help, but we also need answers," Zara said. She glanced at the others who were standing quietly, waiting for Darren to respond. "You've been living here alone for months. Do you know if there are any other humans left?" Darren shook his head slowly. "I've been here for a while now. The war, it didn't leave much behind. I've heard no sign of other human survivors." The group of widows exchanged looks, their expressions filled with silent concern. They had come from different worlds, different species, but their shared grief bound them together. Zara was their leader, but she wasn't the only one holding the weight of their survival. Each woman carried her own burden. "You're not alone anymore," Darren continued, his voice softer this time. "You'll be safe here for now, but we need to move fast. We don't know if your enemies are still out there." Lyra, the healer, stepped forward, her face marked by a quiet sadness. "We've been running for so long, we've lost so much, I don't know if we can run anymore." Darren stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched endlessly before him. The planet was as unforgiving as it had always been, its barren surface reflecting the emptiness he felt inside. He had lived alone, for so long, learning to survive without anyone else. The presence of the 5 alien women had changed that, but it also stirred something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't sure what to call it, but it felt like hope. For the first time since his exile, Darren had a purpose beyond just surviving. These women had come to him, and despite their strange appearances and different backgrounds, he felt an undeniable connection to them. They were survivors, just like him. And now, they were bound together by something larger than fate. It was their fight, their survival, and their chance to make a difference. The soft crunch of footsteps behind him made Darren turn. It was Zara, her violet skin glowing under the setting sun, her face as serious as ever. "Darren," she called, her voice strong yet tired. "We've made a plan." He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A plan? What do you mean?" "We need to act fast," Zara said. "The warlord's forces are far-reaching, but they're not invincible. If we move quickly, we can strike first, but we need to be ready for anything." Darren nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "What do you need from me?" Zara stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "We need you to lead us. You're a soldier. You've been through battles. You know what it takes to win. We've been running for so long, and now it's time to stop. It's time to take a stand." Darren hesitated for a moment. He had never led anyone before, not in the way she was asking, but he understood what it meant to be pushed to the brink, and he knew deep down that they had no choice. If they didn't act, they would be hunted down like prey. "I'll do what I can," Darren said quietly, his voice firm. "But we'll need a solid plan. I won't risk your lives on a gamble." Zara smiled, a rare expression that softened her features. "We trust you, Darren. You've already proven yourself to us. You didn't have to help us. You could have stayed hidden, but you didn't. That's why we're with you." Darren looked at the others who had gathered near the shelter. Lyra, the healer, was sitting on a rock, her eyes closed as if she were meditating. Mara, the scout, was sharpening a knife, her movements quick and precise. Rona, the strategist, was reviewing maps and notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kara, the engineer, was working on one of the ship's broken components, her hands moving with practiced skill. They were all busy, preparing for whatever came next. But despite their different roles, they shared the same goal: to survive and to fight back. Rona was the first to speak. "We've gone over the ship's logs. There's a chance we can trace the warlord's movements, see where they're coming from, but we'll need to move quickly. If we wait too long, they'll be on us before we even have a chance to act." Kara added, her voice practical as always, "We can use the ship's wreckage to make some weapons. We don't have much, but we can work with what we have. The planet's materials are rough, but I can make something that can help us." Mara stood up, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I'll go ahead and scout. I know the terrain better than anyone. I'll find out what's ahead of us, how far the enemy has come. If we can get close to their forces, we can gather intel without being spotted." Lyra spoke up softly. "I'll stay behind and keep everyone healthy. If anyone gets injured, we need to be prepared." Darren looked around at the group, his thoughts racing. They were all so different, yet they had come together for the same reason: survival. He had never expected to find allies, let alone such capable ones. These women had been through unimaginable losses, yet they were still standing, still fighting. He took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, we'll move out at dawn. Zara, you'll be with me. We'll lead the way. Rona, Mara, you'll gather intel and prepare the weapons. Kara, help Lyra get ready. We need everyone in top shape." Zara's eyes gleamed with determination. "We're ready, Darren. Let's make sure we don't fail." The plan in motion, the next morning the air was crisp and the sky a soft shade of blue. The group was gathered outside the shelter, their supplies packed and ready. The first light of day cast long shadows across the land as Darren took a final look at their small encampment. "Remember," he said, addressing the group, "we stick together. We move fast and we stay quiet. We don't engage unless we have no other choice." Zara nodded, her expression serious. She was ready. They all were. As they set off, the terrain was rocky and uneven, but Darren led them with a steady pace. Zara walked beside him, her steps confident. The others followed closely, their eyes scanning the environment for any sign of danger. Darren felt a strange sense of purpose as he led them through the rugged landscape. For so long, he had been a man without a cause. Now he was leading a team of survivors, each with their own strengths and skills. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about standing up against the forces that had taken everything from them. After hours of travel, they arrived at the first landmark, a small abandoned outpost that had once been a trading post for passing ships. The place was quiet, eerie even, but it offered the perfect vantage point to scout the surrounding area. "We'll rest here for a while," Darren said. "Mara, Rona, you're on lookout. The rest of us will get some rest. We move again at sunset." As the group settled into their positions, Darren took a moment to reflect on what had led him here. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight, but now he was leading a group of people who needed him. They didn't need him to be a soldier. They needed him to be a leader. Zara approached him, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Darren, you've already proven yourself to us. You've shown us what it means to fight for something. We're with you no matter what happens." Darren met her gaze, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Connection. He wasn't alone anymore. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "We'll make it through this. Together." As the group rested, they all understood that their journey was just beginning. The fight was far from over, but they were no longer just survivors. They were fighters, allies, and a family bound by a shared purpose. And together, they would stand against whatever came their way. The battle was just beginning. The wind howled across the desolate landscape, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting a deep orange glow on the barren earth. The team had spent the last few days moving quickly, staying hidden from view, always on the move. Darren knew that time was running out. The warlord's forces were getting closer, and if they didn't act soon, the chances of escaping or winning would be slim. They had reached a high ridge overlooking the valley below, a perfect vantage point to observe the movements of their enemies. Darren had asked the group to rest, but his mind was racing. He had never led a team like this before, never been responsible for so many lives, yet he couldn't help but feel the pressure. Their survival depended on him, and that was a weight he couldn't shake off. Zara walked over to him, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to move soon," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We can't keep running. We have to strike first." Darren looked at her, his face set in a firm expression. "I agree, but we need to know more about them. We can't just charge in without a plan. We'll be sitting ducks if we do. Zara nodded in understanding. We'll have to take the risk, but we can't keep hiding forever. We need to show them that we're not weak, that we can fight back. Darren turned to the others who were scattered around the camp, each of them preparing in their own way. Lyra, the healer, was tending to a small cut on Mara's arm, her calm presence providing reassurance. Rona was reviewing the maps again, making quick calculations in her mind. Kara was working on some mechanical equipment, tinkering with a few parts they had scavenged from the wreckage. Darren walked over to Rona. "Any luck?" he asked. Rona looked up, her expression focused. "I've been analyzing their movements. From the ship's data, the warlords' forces are divided into 3 main groups. One is stationed near a mining colony to the north, another near the border of the valley, and the last one is further east. They're spread out, but they've been getting closer to our location every day." "That doesn't give us much time," Darren muttered. He paused, his eyes scanning the map. "If we strike the group to the east, we can catch them off guard. It's the smallest of the 3, but we need to move quickly and quietly." Rona nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our best chance." Darren turned to the group. "All right, here's the plan. We'll move out before dawn. We'll head east using the cover of the mountains to stay hidden. Kara, Mara, I need you two to scout ahead. Find out exactly where the enemy is positioned. Once we know their location, we'll plan our attack. The rest of us will follow." Kara gave a quick nod. "Understood. We'll stay out of sight." Mara, always the quiet one, spoke up. "I'll make sure we don't leave any tracks. We'll be invisible to them." Zara stepped forward. "What if we're spotted?" "If we're seen, we fight," Darren said, firmly. "But we'll do everything in our power to remain unseen. Our goal is to gather intel and disable their equipment. We don't need to wipe them out, we just need to send a message." The night had fallen silent. The distant stars above seemed indifferent to the struggle below. Darren stood at the edge of a cliff, his eyes scanning the valley. The wind had died down, leaving only the quiet sounds of the world around them. The last few days had been a whirlwind, swift, strategic, and unexpected. They had struck the warlords' forces, but the victory had come at a cost. The enemy was not defeated. Far from it. "We can't stay here long." Zara's voice broke through the stillness, steady and determined as ever. "They'll be looking for us. They'll come for us." Darren turned to face her, his eyes heavy with thought. He could see the weight of the situation in her eyes. They had struck the enemy hard, leaving behind disarray and confusion, but it hadn't been enough to crush their spirits. The warlords' forces were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to track them down. "We need to move, but we also need to make sure they feel the blow," Darren said, his voice firm. "They think they're in control. But we're not done yet." Zara nodded, and the 2 of them turned back to the group, who were preparing for the next stage of their plan. The rest of the widows, Lyra, Mara, Rona, and Kara, were busy packing up the supplies, making sure everything was ready for the next move. Rona, always the strategist, was studying the terrain ahead. "We can't keep running forever. If we keep moving, we'll eventually run out of places to hide. We need to make them come to us, to force their hand." Mara, who had always been the silent observer, spoke up, her voice quiet but determined. "We can't let them regroup. If we hit them hard enough, they might not have the strength to keep going." Kara, the engineer, looked up from the device she was working on, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I've rigged up a few surprises. For them, they won't know what hit them." Darren felt a sense of pride as he looked at the team. They were more than just survivors now. They were a force to be reckoned with. Each of them had a role to play, and they played it well. They were a family, united not by blood, but by a shared purpose. "All right," Darren said, drawing everyone's attention. "Here's the plan. We'll set up a trap. We use their own arrogance against them. They'll think we're weak, that we're scattered and disorganized, but we'll be waiting for them." Zara stepped forward, her eyes hard with resolve. "We'll strike fast, then retreat. Keep them on edge. We don't have to wipe them out. We just need to break their will." Darren nodded. "Exactly. We'll show them that they can't just hunt us down. We're not their prey. We're their equal." The plan was simple but risky. They would bait the enemy forces into pursuing them, leading them into a narrow pass where they would make their stand. Kara's traps, combined with their skills and the terrain, would give them the edge. But the risk was high. If they failed, they would be cornered with nowhere to run. The approach. The morning light was still faint when they began their march. The air was cold, and the ground beneath their feet was rocky and uneven. They moved quickly, staying low to the ground to avoid detection. Mara led the way, her keen eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The others followed closely, their steps silent but sure. Rona kept checking the map, adjusting their path as they moved. "We'll be at the pass in an hour. Once we're there, we'll have to move fast." Kara carried a heavy pack filled with makeshift explosives, her hands busy double-checking the detonators. She had been working on the traps for days, using the materials they had scavenged from the wreckage of the ship. If everything went according to plan, the enemy wouldn't even know what hit them. Lyra walked beside Darren, her eyes focused on the terrain ahead. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Darren looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "We don't have a choice. We either strike, or we're dead. We have to make them think we're stronger than we are." Lyra nodded, her gaze drifting to the others. "I trust you, Darren. We all do." The trap is set. When they reach the pass, they quickly set up their positions. Darren and Zara took the highest ground, positioning themselves behind some large rocks that provided cover. The others spread out, carefully placing the traps Kara had made, making sure to leave no trace of their movements. The sun was starting to rise higher, and the heat of the day began to make the air shimmer with heat. Time was running out. They had to be ready. "We're almost there," Mara whispered into the comms. "The enemy's closing in. They'll be here in 15 minutes. Darren's pulse quickened. The moment of truth was coming. He signaled to Zara, and the two of them prepared their weapons, making sure everything was in place. The rest of the group was hidden, waiting for the signal. Finally, they saw them. The first of the enemy soldiers. They were moving in a loose formation, clearly unaware of the trap that lay ahead. The rest of the enemy forces were spread out, coming in from different angles. It was the perfect opportunity. Darren gave the signal. The ambush. The enemy troops entered the pass, and everything went quiet. Then in an instant, chaos erupted. Kara's traps went off first, sending a series of explosive shocks through the air. The enemy soldiers were thrown into disarray, some of them falling to the ground, others scrambling to figure out what was happening. It was the perfect distraction. Mara was the first to strike. She moved swiftly, taking down 2 soldiers before they even knew what hit them. Her agility and speed made her a deadly force, and the enemy had no chance against her quick strikes. Zara and Darren followed closely behind, their weapons firing in sync. They picked off the enemy soldiers with precision, taking out the ones who were still trying to regroup. The element of surprise was on their side, and it was clear the enemy wasn't prepared for the ferocity of their attack. Rona coordinated from above, using the high ground to direct the others, making sure they didn't get surrounded. She provided cover, picking off soldiers as they tried to escape. For a moment it seemed as if the battle would be won without much struggle. The enemy was disoriented, their forces scattered, and they couldn't keep up with the speed and precision of the group's attack. But then, a new wave of soldiers appeared from behind the ridge. It was the warlord's elite guard, well-trained, heavily armed and ready for a fight. Darren's heart sank. They hadn't expected this. The counterattack, the elite guard charged forward, their weapons raised, ready to strike. The ambush was turning into a full-scale battle, and Darren could see the enemy closing in. "We need to pull back," Darren shouted over the comms. "Fall back to the secondary position." But it was too late. The enemy had already flanked them, cutting off any escape routes. "Stay calm," Zara ordered. "We fight. We don't back down." Darren's mind raced. They were outnumbered, but they weren't done yet. The enemy had underestimated them, and now they had to make sure they paid for it. The battle was fierce. Explosions filled the air and gunfire echoed through the pass. The team fought with everything they had, using their skills and their teamwork to push the enemy back. It wasn't easy, and they lost ground at times, but they kept fighting. Darren led the charge, his mind focused on one goal: survival. He wasn't about to let them take everything from him again. He fought alongside Zara, Rona, Lyra, Kara, and Mara, their strength combined making them a force the enemy could not ignore. As the battle raged on, Darren felt a surge of adrenaline. They had come this far, and they couldn't afford to lose. Now, he would fight until his last breath, not just for his survival, but for theirs. The sun was setting over the barren valley, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. The battle had raged for hours, but Darren's resolve had not wavered. The enemy, led by the warlord's elite guard, had proven to be more formidable than anticipated. The traps they had set had worked, but not without consequences. The enemy was regrouping, preparing for their counterattack, and Darren could feel the pressure mounting. He looked around at the group, the 5 alien widows who had become more than just allies. They were his family. They had fought together, bled together, and now they were facing the final moments of the battle. It was all or nothing. "We've got to hold them off until we can escape," Darren said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "They're not just after us, they're after everything we stand for. We fight for survival, for our homes, and for the future." Zara, standing beside him, nodded. Her eyes were fierce, filled with the fire of a warrior who had lost everything but was ready to take it all back. "We don't run anymore," she said. "We stand and fight." Mara, the scout, moved closer, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "The warlord's forces are closing in, but they're disorganized. If we push hard now, we might catch them off guard." Rona, always the strategist, spoke with a calmness that belied the tension in the air. "We've already weakened them. The key is to keep the pressure on them. If we make them think we have more forces than we do, they might break." Kara, the engineer, was already working on her next surprise, adjusting the explosives that had been set earlier in the battle. "I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve. We're not done yet." Lyra, the healer, moved from person to person, making sure everyone was in top shape. Despite the battle's intensity, she remained calm, focusing on keeping the team healthy and ready for the next wave of fighting. Darren took a deep breath, his mind racing. The plan was simple. They had to hold the line, make the warlord's forces believe they were stronger than